This happened when I was in high school. I'm a girl, and I was in 11th grade at the time. I used to walk to school every day because I lived close. It took about 10 to 15 minutes, and I walked on sidewalks. One morning, I left home at 7:30 a.m., as usual, because school started at 7:50. As I walked out, I saw a car on the street. It was in front of the sidewalk I used. I didn't recognize it and planned to walk past it, but the passenger side window rolled down, and a guy inside asked if I needed a ride to school. I didn't know him, and didn't think he went to my school. He said his name was Ryan, I think, and he was friends with Erica, who was one of my best friends. He was going to pick her up and offered to give us both rides to school. I felt weird about it and said no, maybe some other time. I wanted to check with Erica if she knew him. The guy seemed disappointed but said okay. I kept walking, and when he drove past me, he stopped, rolled down his window again, and said, "Last chance." I said no again, and then he drove off. I walked the rest of the way to school, and everything was normal. In my first hour English class, about 30 minutes in, the school went into lockdown. We were told to sit at the back, lights off, and the door locked. We waited for about 20 minutes until the lockdown ended. Later, I found out that a man walked into the school after it started, ignored the receptionist, and hid in the locker area. The school was locked down, but he managed to escape when they found him. They searched, but couldn't catch him. I had no idea who this guy was. After school, I walked home, and halfway there, I saw the same car again. I got a bad feeling because this guy wasn't who he claimed to be. The car was parked on the side of the road that I had to walk past. I walked faster, but when I got near, he said hi. I said hi and kept walking. Then he said he was in my school earlier. I stopped, shocked. He laughed and bragged about the lockdown and escape. He opened his car door and I started running. He chased me, but luckily, a car I knew was driving down the road. I ran toward it, and it was my classmate Matt. I got inside, told him to lock the doors, and we drove away. The guy chased us but couldn't get in. I explained everything to Matt, called the police, and he dropped me off at my house. The police found the man later that day. He had been stalking me for days without me knowing. He could have passed for a student, but he was actually in his mid-20s and not a student at all. This happened years ago, but I still remember it. I'm grateful Matt drove by when he did. I don't know what would have happened otherwise. My name is Jake, and I used to work the night shift as a clerk in a downtown condominium. The building, constructed in the late 60s, had its fair share of security concerns, particularly with the parking garage accessible from street level on both levels. The multitude of entry points, often tucked away in blind spots of the security camera system, required me to make 2 rounds around the entire building during my shift to ensure no unauthorized individuals had found their way in. While carjackings were the occasional serious issue, my nightly encounters mostly involved homeless people seeking refuge in the garage. Evicting them was the least enjoyable part of my job, but it had to be done. After several months on the job, I became familiar with every nook and cranny, discovering the building's maze-like structure due to numerous renovations over the years. One particular spot stood out as the creepiest: the first-floor door in the garage leading to a narrow corridor beneath the ramp to the second level. It was about 3 feet wide and ran about 20 to 30 feet, leading to nowhere. At the end of this eerie corridor was a large water pipe with a valve, the sole reason for the space's existence. The door, however, had a bizarre locking mechanism, a large sliding bolt latch on the outside with no padlock or keyhole. It could only be locked from the outside, trapping anyone inside with no means of unlocking it from within. Despite my concerns, management was aware of the peculiar space but showed no intention of addressing it. I was tasked with checking it every night, but fear prevented me from stepping foot inside. Months passed without incident. But then one fateful night, my worst fear materialized. It was around 3 in the morning, halfway through my shift. As I conducted my rounds in the parking garage, a sudden slam echoed, alerting me to investigate. My heart sank when I saw the door to the dead-end hallway wide open. I cautiously approached, fearing the worst. Shining my flashlight down the corridor, I found it empty except for an empty glass bottle. I sighed, assuming someone had hastily left upon hearing me. Duty compelled me to pick up the bottle, though anxiety surged within me as I took a few steps into the hallway. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and by the time I reached it, the latch had already locked. Panic set in as I banged on the door, screaming for help, but no one answered. Alone, trapped, and with no phone service due to the building's structure, I felt a sense of suffocation. Car alarms echoed in the garage, indicating the malevolent presence of the person who had trapped me. With no way to call for help, I could only wait for someone to open the door from the outside. Hours passed, and my hope dwindled until, through persistent banging, I finally caught the attention of an early worker. Relieved but shaken, I was let out, only to discover the aftermath: a dozen cars broken into, shattered glass covering the parking lot. The perpetrator knew how to trap me and silence alarms, leaving tens of thousands of dollars in damages and theft. Despite my ordeal, the culprit remained unidentified on the cameras, slipping away without consequence. I lost my job in the aftermath, but after what I experienced, returning was the last thing on my mind. Years ago, I found myself working as a barista at a charming coffee shop tucked away in a town that was once bustling with life. The coffee shop, a haven for local artists and musicians, hosted intimate gigs and open mics that breathed life into the evenings. Although the vibrant spirit of the place lingered, the dynamics had changed since the mysterious incidents that unfolded during my time there. Unlike today's operating hours, the coffee shop used to stay open 24/7 from Thursday to Sunday. The night shifts, particularly the graveyard slot, were dreaded by the staff. The tips were meager, and the eerie solitude that enveloped the place in the small hours weighed heavily on our shoulders. I vividly remember the cautionary advice given: never keep more than $50 in the drawer during the graveyard shift. It wasn't just a precaution. It was a palpable acknowledgement of the lurking shadows that danced on the fringes of the town. Nestled on the outskirts, the shop sat in a precarious balance between a decent part of town and the shadow of a more questionable neighborhood. The night hours blurred the lines between safety and danger, transforming the quaint charm of the location into a haunting tableau. In the stillness of the night, there was no such thing as a good side of town, a revelation that unfolded truthfully as the night grew darker. To ward off the unsettling solitude, I often called upon one of my male friends to accompany me during the graveyard shift. Among them, Nick was the reliable companion who willingly braved the quiet hours with me. Our arrangement was simple. He would work on his laptop, I'd slip him a few beers under the table, and together we'd navigate the long nights. We shared platonic conversations, and Nick's knowledge about the coffee shop, despite being a mere friend, led to playful banter about him practically being an honorary employee. Our camaraderie had always been lighthearted, and any potential tension was relegated to the realm of awkward one-night stands, until a fateful summer night in 2019. It was a Saturday, and Nick, my usual partner in the graveyard shift escapade, had bailed on me to attend a family wedding. A replacement friend had covered Thursday and Friday, but on Saturday, exhaustion prevailed, and I found myself bracing for the solitary night ahead. Surprisingly, the night unfolded at a languid pace, sparing me the chaos of unruly customers. By 3 a.m, my tip jar boasted a meager $10, but the peace of the night was abruptly shattered. The shop, a hollow echo of its bustling self, was empty save for me. As I busied myself with the routine of brewing coffee, an inexplicable tension hung in the air. A figure passed by the front window, catching my peripheral vision. I glanced over, but the space outside was devoid of any presence. My senses heightened as I waited for someone to approach the back door, a route customers could use. Minutes ticked by, and still, no one materialized. Lingering by the register, I decided it was time to mop the floors and erase the night's footprints. Filling the mop bucket in the back, the sound of the running faucet was abruptly interrupted by the creaking of the front door. I assured the unseen visitor that I would be with them shortly, finishing my tasks before wheeling the mop bucket out from behind the counter. Strangely, the intruder had vanished. Shrugging off the unease, I chalked it up to someone slipping into the bathroom without notice. The men's room door was closed, a solitary light emanating from within. A disquiet settled in my stomach, a subtle awareness that a presence lingered. Yet, lacking concrete evidence, I continued mopping, rationalizing the discomfort away. The bathroom door swung open, revealing Nick, seemingly returning from the wedding. Relief washed over me, and I welcomed him warmly. Grateful for his unexpected visit, I offered him anything on the house. As I busied myself behind the espresso machine, a shift in Nick's demeanor unfolded. His friendly expression contorted into something sinister, and a wave of chills coursed through my body. Confusion masked my trembling voice as I asked what he was doing. Nick, now wearing a psychopathic grin, produced a knife from behind his back, declaring his unsettling intentions. "We're friends. What about the cameras?" I pleaded, the fear evident in my voice. Nick advanced, and the revelation struck. The cameras were mere props, never recording anything. Panic set in as he coerced me toward the back of the shop, locking both doors and extinguishing the open sign. Desperation gripped me as I pleaded for him to stop, but Nick's aggression intensified. My attempts to find an escape route revealed the deliberate nature of his actions. Cornered and terrified, I grasped for the panini press on the sandwich counter. The metallic blow connected, slicing open my arm in the struggle, but it also knocked Nick off balance. Wasting no time, I vaulted over the counter, sprinting out of the back door and into my car. The realization hit. Nick had parked his car strategically, blocking my escape. Frantically dialing the police, I locked myself in, only to witness Nick attempting to break into my car moments before speeding away. Treated for my wounds, I provided a detailed statement to the police. Nick had vanished, leaving behind a haunting memory. Despite the revelation about the non-functional cameras and the employer's civil liabilities, I chose to drop the charges. Nick's disappearance and the aftermath of his actions seemed punishment enough. Years have passed, and the memory of that harrowing night lingers. Nick remains an enigma, a specter lost to the shadows. The once thriving coffee shop, haunted by the echoes of that betrayal, has long abandoned its overnight operations. People might assume I left the job because of the incident, but I continued working until a few months ago, carrying the weight of that indelible night. I work at a gas station right in the middle of my town. My shifts change a lot, but I usually end up working overnight or early mornings. I've been here for about a year now, and honestly, it's not too bad. It's just a regular job, not too fancy, but it pays the bills. All I have to do is stand behind the register for 8 hours and chat with the occasional customer. Today, I'm on the overnight shift, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It's usually pretty quiet at night, especially during the week. And to add to the calm, it's raining quite a bit tonight, so I expect it to be even quieter than usual. For the first couple of hours, I just sit on a chair behind the register, waiting for customers. A few people come in to pay for gas with cash, but by around 12:30 or 1 a.m., it's dead quiet. No one's coming inside, and hardly anyone is even getting gas outside. With no customers in sight, I decide to tidy up the shelves a bit. They're not too messy, but it gives me something to do. As I'm rearranging items, my back is to the windows, but I catch a glimpse of headlights shining through the store as someone pulls into the pumping stations. I don't pay much attention because it's just a regular person getting gas. I keep busy for maybe 10 minutes before I glance out the window again. The car is still there, and there's a man standing next to it. When I look, he quickly moves out of sight, making it clear he was watching me. Feeling a bit uneasy, especially since he's been there for a while, I return to the counter. I check out the window again after a moment, and I see the man getting into his car. The headlights flicker a few times as if he's struggling to start it, but eventually he drives away in a hurry. Something just doesn't sit right with me. I get an idea and check the recent transactions for the pump he used. The last transaction was hours ago. He had no reason to be there for so long, other than watching me through the windows. I decide to stay behind the counter for a while longer, hoping the rest of my shift will pass without incident. Around 3 a.m., I hear something outside. The rain makes it hard to hear, but there's a rhythmic shuffling noise, like footsteps along the side of the building, moving towards the back. I try to look out the window, but I can't see much. I notice there are no cars in the parking lot or by the pumps. I quickly make my way to the back door, a heavy metal door with no windows. I press my ear against it and listen as the footsteps get closer. They stop right on the other side of the door, and I stare at the handle, waiting in silence. It turns slowly, but it's caught by the lock. Everything goes quiet for a moment. Then I hear a frustrated grunt from the other side, followed by a sharp sound scraping against the door. Footsteps retreat back to the side of the gas station. I rush back to the front, hoping to catch a glimpse of the person leaving. But I see nothing. I grab the store phone and dial 911, hoping they can catch whoever was trying to get in before they get away. When the cops arrive, they don't find the person, but they do find a car on the side of the road, not far from the gas station. It's the same car I saw earlier, with the man who was watching me. It had run out of gas and had mismatching license plates. Turns out, it was reported stolen from 2 states over. They also find a long scrape across the back door, likely made by a knife. Knowing all this, I realize how lucky I was. The person was probably up to no good, and who knows what could have happened if they had gotten inside. For the past few years, I've been working as a janitor at a popular fast food joint. My job is simple. I clean. I don't take orders or interact with customers much, because I'm usually scheduled for overnight shifts when the restaurant is closed. Deep cleaning is the name of the game, and it's tough to get it all done during open hours. This particular night started like any other. I arrived at work, and a couple of other employees were still around, but they left shortly after. By 10 p.m., it was just me for the rest of the night. I put on my headphones and got to work, scraping grills and hosing down everything that needed it. Around midnight, I heard a knock at the front of the building. I took off my headphones and walked to the front, expecting to see someone checking if we were still open. But when I looked, there was no one there. I peered out into the parking lot, but it was empty. I knew I'd heard the knock from this side of the building, though. I waited, but there was no repeat of the sound. I figured I must have imagined it and went back to work. Another hour or so passed, and I decided to take my lunch break. I grabbed my lunch bag and sat at one of the tables in the dining area, enjoying the peace and quiet. After finishing my meal, I went to grab the mop from the back, but something caught my eye. A man's face staring at me from outside the drive-thru window. His hair was messy, and his expression was blank, but his eyes... There was something off about them, like they were empty. I froze for a moment, watching as the man calmly turned and walked away. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. After a moment, I mustered up the courage to open the window and check if he was still there, but the darkness outside revealed nothing. I closed and locked the window, feeling on edge for the rest of my shift. As my shift neared its end, I started to relax a bit. The anxiety from earlier began to fade, and I focused on finishing up my tasks. One of the last things I had to do was take out the garbage, which I had been avoiding. I checked the windows one last time before stepping outside, and everything seemed clear. I quickly made my way to the dumpster and started tossing the bags in. But barely 20 seconds in, the man appeared from around the corner. I stopped what I was doing and asked him what he needed, but he didn't respond. Instead, he approached me with that same empty stare. Now that I could see him fully, he was even more terrifying. A large man in a dirty, stained coat. I didn't know what else to do, so I bolted for the door. I managed to open it, but the man stuck his arm in, preventing it from closing completely. I ran to the other end of the restaurant, unlocking the front door and escaping just as the man closed in on me. I sprinted across the parking lot, dialing the police as I went. Within minutes, they arrived, but the man was already gone. We checked the CCTV footage, but his identity remained a mystery. What he wanted from me, I'll never know. But his creepy and unsettling behavior still gives me chills to this day. This story happened many years ago, when I was a young man living out in the Northwest. In those times, I was spending my summers working odd jobs to help pay for college. I would hitchhike occasionally, not daily or anything like that, but from time to time, I would use it to get from one city to another. There was one night, though, that made me stop hitchhiking forever. I would say it was probably my 5th time or so hitchhiking. I needed to get to a city about 30 minutes away and didn't have a car. I couldn't figure out if a bus was going to come through anytime soon, so I decided to stand near the side of the road and wait for a car. Several cars passed me by until finally there was a car that I saw slow down and then stopped next to me. It was a gray car, and the driver already had all his windows down. He leaned his head over to the side of the passenger's window and said hi to me. He didn't seem too friendly, but he asked me where I was going. I told the man, and then he told me to hop in and motioned to the back seat. Based on the couple of words that we said to each other, the guy didn't seem very nice, but I had to make a split-second decision, and I elected to get inside the car. I got in the back and immediately noticed that the man had a type of barrier set up between the front and back seats of the car so that when you were sitting in the back, you really couldn't see anything in the front. This made me regret my decision, but literally as soon as I was inside, the man began driving. I couldn't see him or anything, and now I had just hoped that he wasn't a total creep. His windows were all down in the car, and as we started driving at a decent speed, he rolled them up. When he did, I saw that they were all painted black, so I couldn't see out of them at all. Now I felt like I was in trouble. I tried to roll my window back down, but the button next to my seat didn't do anything. I called out to the man, telling him that I didn't want to ride anymore, but I didn't hear anything from him. I knocked on the barrier, which appeared to be very solid, and asked the man if he could hear me. I got no response, and the more we drove, the more worried I became. I was basically just sitting there in a box, not being able to see anything. I tried the door as well, but of course it was locked. I didn't know what more I could do, other than just sit there and wonder where we were going. He drove for what felt like a really long time. I don't know exactly how long it actually was, but if I had to guess, it was probably about 30 minutes. At last, I felt the car slowing down and then finally come to a stop. I heard the doors all unlock and then heard the driver's door open. The man started walking away, and I decided to open up my door and look outside. I slowly opened it up. I saw outside that there was some sort of dirt road, but it appeared to almost be like a driveway of some sort. I looked around. It was very silent, other than the distant sound of crickets in the night. I wondered where I was and where the man had gone. I didn't hear any cars or see any lights to indicate buildings. As I looked outside further, there appeared to be just a woods and a dirt pavement that we were on. I stepped outside the car to see a grass field with a little shed in the distance, but it didn't really seem like anybody would be inside there. Then I suddenly heard footsteps coming from another direction behind the car. I took off and ran into the woods. I didn't stop running and had so much adrenaline that I probably ran for 10 minutes straight in the woods. I was terrified, but after I got too tired to keep running, I slowed down and didn't hear any noises. I had no idea where I was or how to get to safety. I kept on walking through the woods in the same direction, and eventually I made it to a road. This road was paved and not dirt. I figured I could follow it to get to some sort of town, or at least a gas station or something. The road was quiet, and I began walking on it for maybe 10 minutes before hearing a car in the distance. Then I saw the car start to come around the corner. I feared it was the same man and ran back into the woods until I noticed that it was actually a police car. I then ran out of the woods onto the street. The car saw me, and then I saw the flashing lights turn on. I then ran to the officer who got out of the car and asked me what I was doing. I told him what had happened, and he was able to drive me to a nearby town. I stayed there for the night and then decided to just wait for a bus and not hitchhike again. I was on a road trip, making my way back from a relaxing vacation. The drive home stretched for about 16 hours, but I was determined to conquer it in one go, avoiding the need for a hotel room. As the sun began to set, a wave of exhaustion hit me. My eyelids grew heavy, and in an attempt to stay awake, I resorted to snacking on the food I had brought along. However, the allure of sleep proved too strong. I contemplated taking a brief break, maybe even catching a short nap to recharge. Glancing at the map, I realized there were no towns in sight for miles. The The only nearby town was an hour away, and uncertainty settled in about safely reaching it. A sign for a gas station appeared on the horizon, offering a potential refuge. I took the exit, and the gas station stood as the sole structure at the corner of a desolate intersection. It sat in eerie silence, with two deserted roads leading to seemingly nowhere. The main building's lights were off, casting a shadow over the desolate scene. Parking on the side, I spent the next 5 minutes surveying the surroundings, ensuring the place was safe. No cars approached for gas, and the road remained empty. It was an unsettling place, yet the absence of people provided a strange comfort. Leaning my seat back, I turned off the car and succumbed to the embrace of sleep. When I awoke, the world was cloaked in the dim glow of 2 a.m. Groggy and disoriented, I was unsure why my eyes had opened until a clanking sound echoed from outside. Turning towards the gas station, I noticed a man behind one of the pumps, tinkering with something. The pump obstructed my view, revealing only fragments of his movements. Strangely, there was no sign of his car in the parking area or by the pumps. It was just him. A sense of isolation intensified as I realized there were no other places for miles around. The man continued his mysterious activities, turning around after a minute and disappearing towards the road. Assuming he had left, I tried to shake off the unease settling in. Exhaustion weighed heavily on me, and I drifted back into a light slumber. It didn't last long. Abruptly, I was jolted awake by a noise against my car. A man stood by the window, peering inside, and my heart skipped a beat. He attempted to open the doors, seemingly oblivious to my presence, but the intent behind his actions was unclear. The man suddenly pivoted, heading towards the gas station's side. Kneeling down, he picked something up, and an unsettling feeling crept over me. Reacting instinctively, I ignited the car, reversing hastily. The man, now holding a metal pipe, stared at me as I sped away. My heart raced, and I remained fully awake for the rest of the drive. The circumstances of that night remained shrouded in terror. The man's intentions were a mystery, his activities with the gas pumps unsettling. The thought of what could have transpired if he had broken into my car haunted my thoughts, and I couldn't shake the fear that lingered long after the incident. This happened when I was in 10th grade. My high school was pretty average, and nothing too exciting happened most days. I took the bus to and from school every day, which was only about 10 minutes from my house. One spring day, I was in my third period writing class, which I always found boring. With about 20 minutes left, I asked my teacher if I could go to the bathroom. She said yes, so I left the classroom and walked down the hall to the bathrooms. They weren't far, just at the end of the hall and around a corner. While I was in the bathroom, I heard the door open, but no one came in. Instead, I heard someone say, "Is anybody in here?" That confused me because it was a multi-stall bathroom, so why would they ask that? I didn't answer, and after a few seconds, the door closed. Whoever it was had left. I figured it was probably a teacher doing a quick check. I finished up, and while I was washing my hands, the school intercom beeped. Then, an announcement came on. The school was in lockdown, and it wasn't a drill. Hearing that made me nervous. Maybe that's why someone had checked the bathroom earlier. I wasn't sure what to do, stay in the bathroom or head back to my classroom. I decided to go back to class since my teacher would probably wonder where I was. When I stepped into the hallway, it was completely empty and eerily quiet. As I was about to head back to class, I heard footsteps coming from around the corner. I thought it was probably a teacher, but I didn't want to get in trouble for being in the hallway during the lockdown, so I tried to hide. The footsteps kept getting closer, so I quickly turned and walked down a different hallway. To my surprise, the footsteps sped up, like they were following me. That's when it hit me. Maybe this wasn't a teacher. What if it was someone who wasn't supposed to be here? I started to panic and walked even faster, but the footsteps behind me kept getting louder. I turned another corner and spotted a door that was slightly open. Without thinking, I slipped inside, hoping the person wouldn't follow me. I closed the door behind me. It was dark, and I realized I was in some kind of storage closet with extra desks and boxes. I stayed completely silent, even holding my breath. I could hear the footsteps getting closer and closer, but then they walked right past the door. I felt a wave of relief when I heard them fade away down the hall. It was quiet again, and I started to relax, thinking I was safe. But then, out of nowhere, I heard a noise behind me in the room. I turned around and saw a man coming out from behind some boxes. It was too dark to see his face, but I could tell he wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't think twice. I bolted for the door and ran into the hallway as fast as I could. I sprinted down the hall, not looking back, and after a minute, I saw one of my teachers. He looked confused, but I quickly told him there was a man hiding in the closet. We headed toward the front of the school, where the main offices were. There, we found out the police had just arrived. Within 20 minutes, they found the man. He had moved and was hiding in a bathroom. It turns out he wasn't supposed to be in the school, which was the whole reason for the lockdown. The footsteps I had heard earlier, they were just a teacher. Looking back, I can't believe I hid in the same room as that guy. I should have just gone straight back to my classroom. 5 years ago, I moved into a standard house in what I thought was a really nice neighborhood. It was peaceful, and everyone I met around my street was friendly. However, my next-door neighbor to the west was a different story. From the time I moved in, I rarely saw anyone outside on his property. The yard was simple, but there was always a car in the driveway, so I knew someone lived there. I didn't pay much attention to it since I had other things to focus on. One day, I was outside getting my mail. As I started to walk back up the driveway, I noticed my next-door neighbor standing at one of his front windows, just staring at me. He seemed to be glaring right at me. It was really awkward. I looked away, pretending to be engrossed in my mail, but as I walked a few more steps, I couldn't resist glancing back. He was still staring, and he looked almost angry. I smiled and waved at him, expecting at least a nod in return, but he just kept staring until I was inside my house. That was my first interaction with my neighbor, and it was strange. It had already been about 6 months since I moved in, and this was the first time I had seen him. I thought he must be really unfriendly, or just weird, or maybe he disliked me for some unknown reason. I didn't play loud music or have parties, so I couldn't think of any reason for him to dislike me. Still, it didn't bother me too much. Some people are just unfriendly, and there's nothing you can do about it. About a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks later, I saw him again. It was around 10 p.m., and I was just getting home. As I got out of my car, I noticed him standing at his window again, staring at me just like before. I didn't look at him again until I was at my front door, and sure enough, he was still staring. This was only the second time I noticed him, but he sure seemed strange to me. Later that night, I went to bed, but around 4 a.m., I woke up feeling really thirsty. Occasionally, I wake up dehydrated, so I got up to get some water from the kitchen. On my way there, I passed by the living room window and was shocked to see my neighbor standing in my front yard, staring right into my window. He was about 10 feet away, with that same unsettling glare. The feeling of shock and terror that I experienced at that moment was unforgettable. I quickly ran out of sight of the window and went to the kitchen, pacing around and wondering what on earth my neighbor was doing. After a couple of minutes, I felt a bit better, got some water, and decided to go back and see if he was still there. When I returned, he was gone. I walked around every window of my house, looking outside, but I didn't see him anywhere. Eventually, I went back to sleep, though it took me a while to calm down. The next day, still thinking about the incident, I decided to confront my neighbor. I didn't want to, but I felt that I should. I walked over to his front yard. This time, he wasn't at the window. I knocked on his door, but there was no answer at first. The car was in the driveway, so I knew he was home. I rang the doorbell, and finally, the door opened. There he was, the same guy who had been looking into my window the previous night. I smiled, offered my hand for him to shake, and introduced myself. He didn't shake my hand. Instead, he asked me what I wanted in a rather rude manner. I told him that I thought I saw him in my front yard the previous night, and wondered what he was doing. He denied it, cursed at me, and then slammed the door in my face. I walked back to my house, feeling confused and frustrated. About a month later, I saw a moving truck in his driveway and some movers loading furniture. I saw my neighbor with them, and it was clear he was moving out. I can't say I missed him at all, but I was still left with questions about what he was doing that night and if it was the only time he had stared into my windows. After he moved out, things returned to normal. The new neighbors who moved in were friendly and sociable, and the weird occurrences stopped. But even now, I sometimes think about that strange man and what his intentions might have been. I go to Taco Bell all the time, especially late at night. Being a senior in college keeps me busy with work and school, and by the time I finish my day, I'm often starving. For the past few years, grabbing food from Taco Bell has become a habit, especially after a long night of studying or work. It was about 2 months ago when something strange happened. It was around 11:30 p.m. I had just finished my shift and was feeling really hungry. The nearest Taco Bell was about 10 minutes away, so I hopped into my car and headed over. Normally, the drive-thru is open until midnight, even though they closed the lobby earlier. Lately, though, I noticed they had started closing early on some nights because they were short on staff. Still, I hoped they'd be open that night. As I pulled into the drive-thru, I noticed something odd right away. There were no other cars in line, and the lights inside the restaurant were off. This was strange because even when the lobby is closed, the drive-thru usually has some lights on. I wasn't sure if they were closed or if it was just another one of those nights when they were running short-staffed. I drove up to the speaker and rolled down my window, waiting for someone to take my order. After a few seconds of silence, I called out, "Hey, are you guys still open?" There was no reply, just more silence. I figured they must have closed early again, so I started to roll up my window and leave. Just as I was about to pull away, I heard something from the speaker. A man's voice came through, but I couldn't understand a word he was saying. It was like when someone talks too close to the phone and their words are all muffled. It sounded strange. I asked him to repeat what he said, but this time there was no response at all. The speaker went silent again. Feeling a little unsettled, I decided it wasn't worth sticking around. I slowly drove forward through the rest of the drive-thru lane, passing the first window where you usually pay. The lights were off, and there was nobody there. As I approached the second window, I noticed something even stranger. The lights inside were off, just like the rest of the place, but there was someone standing in the window. At first, I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe one of the workers had stayed behind or was cleaning up. But then, as I passed by, I saw the person quickly duck down as if they didn't want me to see them. My heart started racing because something about it felt off. And that's when I saw it. The man in the window was wearing a clown mask. The mask covered his entire face, and I couldn't see any part of his real face underneath. My gut told me to get out of there, so I drove off without thinking twice. I ended up stopping at a nearby gas station and grabbing some food instead. But even after I left, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had just seen. Why was there a man wearing a clown mask inside a closed Taco Bell? It didn't make any sense, and the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. The next night, I found myself in the same situation. I had just finished work, and it was a little earlier this time, around 10:30 p.m. I was craving Taco Bell again, so I decided to head back and see if they were open. When I arrived, the place looked normal. There were a few cars in the drive-thru, and the lights were on inside. It was like the strange event from the night before had never happened. I got in line, waited my turn, and ordered my usual. When I pulled up to the window to pay, I decided to ask the woman working about the night before. "Hey, did you guys change your hours or something?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, we still close at midnight, but last night we closed at 9 because we didn't have enough staff." That was when I told her about what I had seen. I mentioned that I had driven by the drive-thru around midnight the previous night and saw a man in the window wearing a clown mask. Her expression changed immediately. She looked surprised and a little concerned. "That's strange," she said. "I was the one who closed last night. I locked up and left at 9. There was nobody else here when I left." A chill went down my spine as I realized what that meant. If she had closed the restaurant at 9, then who had I seen at nearly midnight? Who was the man with the clown mask standing in the window? As I drove home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I replayed the events in my head, the more unsettling it became. Who was the man in the mask? Why was he there? And what would have happened if I hadn't driven away when I did? Even now, I still don't have answers to those questions, but the experience has stuck with me. I've gone to Taco Bell a few times since then, but I'm always a little more cautious, especially when it's late at night. I haven't seen anything strange since that night, but the memory of that man in the clown mask still haunts me. Sometimes, late at night when I'm driving alone, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him again. I used to take the subway to work every day when I worked in New York. Driving was out of the question with all the traffic and parking problems, so the subway made more sense. My commute wasn't too bad. It took me about 20 minutes with 2 different trains to get to my job. I'd get off the subway, walk a few blocks, and I'd be there. One morning, like usual, I got on the subway with a bunch of other people. It was really crowded, as it often is. I usually just kept to myself, listening to music or something to pass the time. When I switched trains, a few other people did the same. One man caught my eye. He was wearing a big black jacket, and I noticed him because he had gotten on the first train at the same stop near my apartment. I didn't think much of it at first. He got off at my stop and walked behind me the whole way to my work. I thought it was just a coincidence. When I reached my office, he kept walking down the street, so I forgot about him and went on with my day. Later, when the workday ended, I walked back to the subway station to go home. That's when I saw the man again, wearing the same jacket, waiting for the subway. I didn't recognize him from before that day, but I figured he must just work in the same area. When the subway arrived, I got on, and to my surprise, the man followed me and sat right next to me. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I couldn't explain why, but something about him just didn't sit right with me. At the next stop, instead of getting off and switching to my usual train to go home, I decided to walk around for a bit to see if he was actually following me. Sure enough, wherever I went, he followed. I was starting to get nervous, but I wasn't sure what to do. Eventually, I went back to the subway station, and we both waited for the next train. He kept a bit of distance, sitting on a bench about 20 feet away, but I could tell he was watching me. When the train arrived, I didn't want to get on because I knew he'd follow me, and I didn't want him to know where I lived. I sat there, letting the train doors stay open, until I had an idea. Just as the doors were about to close, I quickly jumped up and got on the train. I watched the man start to stand, but the doors closed before he could get on. That night, I made it home safely, but I was pretty shaken up. After that, I decided to take a break from the subway for a while. To this day, I still wonder what that guy wanted. One night, after a really long day, my car started acting up. It had been sputtering for a while, and then, without any warning, it just gave up. The engine died completely, and no matter how hard I tried, it wouldn't start again. I was stuck on a deserted stretch of road with no cell phone signal. It was late, probably around 11 p.m., and it was dark, except for the moon and the occasional car passing by. I got out and tried to flag someone down, but the cars that passed didn't even slow down. After a few more failed attempts, I decided my best bet was to hitchhike to the nearest town, which was about 15 miles away. I started walking, hoping someone would pick me up. Finally, a beat-up old sedan pulled up beside me. The driver was a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard. I was hesitant but desperate, so I told him what had happened and asked if he could give me a ride to town. He said he was heading that way and I could come along. At first, the drive was okay. We chatted and had a friendly conversation. He talked about his own car troubles and mentioned a good mechanic in town. But something about him made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, or the fact that he wasn't taking the most direct route. The conversation started getting more personal. He asked about my family, my plans, and kept probing about where I was going and why I was alone. I answered as vaguely as I could, and he seemed to be fishing for information. Then, about halfway through the ride, he suddenly turned onto a smaller road. It was dark, with no streetlights, and the road twisted through the woods. I started to get really anxious and told him that I appreciated the ride, but maybe I should just get out and walk if we were going off the main road. He laughed it off and said not to worry. I began to think about my options, realizing I might have to jump out if things got worse. Finally, the man pulled over, saying he needed to check something under the hood. I stayed in the car, but was ready to bolt if needed. I watched him through the window, and although he was fiddling around, his movements seemed oddly calm. I started to panic and decided I would make a run for it. Just as I was about to open the door, he got back inside and said it was just a minor issue and we could keep going. I nodded, trying to stay calm. We drove a little longer until we finally reached town. I thanked him and got out as quickly as I could, heading straight to the nearest gas station to call a tow truck. While waiting for help, I kept glancing around, still feeling uneasy. The tow truck driver seemed concerned when I told him what happened. He said he'd heard similar stories before where people were led into the woods and then robbed or worse. I had my car towed to the garage and spent the night at a nearby motel. I didn't get much sleep, and the whole experience felt very strange. Maybe I was overreacting because I'd never been in a situation like that before, but I couldn't stop thinking about how things could have turned out differently. If that ever happens again, I'll definitely be more cautious. My name is Emily, and what I'm about to share with you took place a few years ago, back when I was navigating the tumultuous waters of sophomore year in college. The setting? A serene and seemingly safe city that prided itself on low crime rates, friendly locals, and a lack of echoing sirens. Little did I know that the illusion of tranquility would shatter in the course of just one fateful night. It was the late November of 2021, a month that had the city wrapped in a cold embrace. My friends and I decided to hit the town, aiming to celebrate our triumphant survival of finals at a local bar. Despite the city's reputation for safety, it was no stranger to lively establishments, often leading to raucous bar fights and the occasional police intervention. Nevertheless, that night, we were carefree, reveling in the post-exam euphoria. Around 1 a.m., I decided to call it a night as I needed to wrap up packing before my flight home the next day. My friends, however, were determined to squeeze every drop of enjoyment from the evening. With proper goodbyes exchanged, I stumbled out of the bar, phone in hand, and summoned an Uber to whisk me back to my dorm. To my relief, a driver accepted my request almost instantly, a rare occurrence given the late hour. I settled onto an outside bench, the chilly air keeping me alert, when a car pulled up and someone inside gestured for me to hop in. In my slightly inebriated state, I assumed it was my Uber, even though the app indicated he was still a good 4 minutes away. Ignoring the discrepancy, I climbed into the car, and that's when I sensed that something was off. He didn't utter my name or offer a customary greeting. My attempts at small talk were met with curt, one-word responses. Exhausted and not inclined to probe further, I gave him my address, noting that he hadn't bothered to input it into his GPS, an odd choice considering the late hour. As the car rolled through the quiet streets, my discomfort grew. I glanced out the window and realized we were heading in the opposite direction of my campus. Trying to remain composed, I spoke up. "Sir, my college is in the other direction." He acknowledged my words with a glance in the rearview mirror, a nod that conveyed understanding. Yet, he continued driving until we reached a halt beside a decrepit office building. It was then that the surreal fog lifted, and the realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. In a moment of panic, the fake Uber driver instructed me to stay put as he disappeared behind the building. Clutching my cell phone, I discovered multiple missed calls and messages from the real Uber driver. The urgency of the situation hit me, and I knew I had to act swiftly. Slowly, I opened the car door and took off running, desperately trying to maintain my balance. Finding myself in a sparsely populated area, I sought refuge in a nearby shop that miraculously remained open. With trembling hands, I dialed the police, recounting the harrowing ordeal. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers descended upon the office building, but the imposter's car had vanished into the night. I cooperated with the officers, providing a detailed description of the car, hoping it would aid in their investigation. To this day, I remain uncertain if they ever located the mysterious vehicle or identified the driver. However, about a month after my ordeal, a chilling news report surfaced. It detailed the disappearance of a couple who, like me, fell victim to a false Uber. The boyfriend's lifeless body was discovered miles away, while the girlfriend miraculously survived, albeit covered in severe bruises. The report suggested they knew the assailant, leaving me with lingering questions and a haunting sense of unease. As time passed, the car remained elusive, never officially found, and the identity of the driver remained shrouded in mystery. The shadows of that night still linger in my memory, a reminder that danger can lurk even in the quietest corners of seemingly safe cities.